Hi folks, and welcome back to the vlog. This week we have the Fab Phil Tyler in the house. Hi Phil, nice to have you.
Hi Mark.
We are going to go through his 3 pro tips, the things he wished he knew when starting out, or at least he's learned along the way. And so with no further ado, let's kick off with your first, Phil. Sketchbooks. Talk me through that one.
Okay, so when I was a foundation student, we were all told that we needed to keep sketchbooks and we needed to use sketchbooks and we needed to take sketchbooks with us to our interview. So, you know, you did what you were told to do, you made some drawings, but I would say that usually the sketchbooks were sort of full of just observations, just things that I'd noticed, but they weren't really tools that I would use. When I did my BA, of course, I then arrogantly thought I don't need to use sketchbooks. So I don't really think I understood the value of the sketchbook on my degree course. When I graduated and I continued to make work for a few years before I started my MA, I started to realise I didn't have a studio anymore. So the sketchbook started to become my miniature studio, a portable studio that I could take with me anywhere. And when I was commuting to do my MA, so I was at the time living in London, commuting down to Brighton, the sketchbook was something I started to use every day. So every day on the train I would draw, and I would draw whatever was in front of me. But all the thoughts and all the ideas that I had would then go into the back of my sketchbook. Right. So really since about 1988, I've pretty much consistently used sketchbooks ever since. So one of the things about that is obviously your drawing gets better because the more you do, the better you get at it.
To get an idea of what actually you're talking about with sketchbooks and this homework, are they like studies or are they like miniature paintings? Or are they just ideas and little thoughts and
well, it can be a combination thing. So it could be, you know, some life drawing.
Yeah.
You know, it could be something I'm putting together for the purpose of teaching. So, yeah. You know, sometimes if I'm teaching, you know, like a sort of thinking drawing, you know.
Okay.
So there can be all sorts of things. I mean, this is exploring the idea of mark making and how a drawing can be iterative, but, you know, ideas can feed. So sometimes, you know, you've got a kind of problem solving page. I mean, if you look at these, I mean, these won't become any sort of paintings. But this was an input that I was exploring where we were talking about the idea of decorative still life. So what I've done here is I took all the slides that I'd used in a lecture, printed them off and then made collages from them. So I've recombined them back together again. So you're sort of developing new ideas. In more recent times, I'd also say that, you know, I've been doing a lot of drawing on my iPad. So, you know, that is another aspect of drawing. I've felled quite a few trees in terms of sketchbooks.
Well, maybe the digital realm's going to help you in future cut down that carbon emission.
Well, I don't
know. Style free, your second point. What do you do you mean by this? Because I know other people have discussed the idea of wanting to find their style as being important. Do you feel that's not so important?
I think that when I was a student, I thought that was the solution.
Right.
That you found your style and that was it, you were sorted.
Okay.
And if you look at, you know, lots of artists, if you look at a Calaminus, it's like instantaneously you recognize a Calaminus, and then you see the video of Calaminus' studio and there they are stacked up, hundreds and hundreds of versions of pretty much the same painting. When you think about style, often I think it's a series of impositions on the work. It's like I do things like this, I make this sort of mark, I use this sort of color. And when I was working abstractly when I was a student, you know, what you ended up doing was you made marks, but I realized that those marks were essentially borrowed bits of other people's mark making. When I stopped doing that and I started to work from observation, I realized that the problem was then a different one, in that there was the referent, there was the thing in front of me, and I had to respond to it. And the best way to respond to it was to be as open as possible. Now, for me, it's really obvious that if I'm painting a human figure, if I'm painting a nude, the requirements to paint that might be quite different than if I'm painting a stormy sky. Right. So it's not that I apply a style that is across the board, everything looks the same color palette, same facture, same sort of use of tools. It's simply that the subject matter tells you how you should respond to it. So obviously, you know my skies, but often the skies are about that emotional experience you have in the landscape. So the nature of the landscapes tend to be quite physically painted, and they're often quite quickly painted. You're trying to get that idea across. If you're painting a still life and you're painting reflective objects, then you're looking at the kind of qualities of those and thinking, how do I achieve that through mark making? So clearly I'm still a painterly painter, and I like the idea of the physicality of the material. But for me, if you apply a style to it, then it stops becoming a response to something. It just becomes an imposition.
I think for me, as a complete outsider and somebody who knows nothing about art at all, I still feel that when I look at Philip Tyler's landscapes and I look at Philip Tyler's seascapes and cloudscapes, and then I look at Philip Tyler's nudes, they still feel like Philip Tyler. I think the way you mark, if you like to use that term you use, the mark making, has a certain element, a certain style, a certain way to do it in itself. And for me as a gallerist, that's really important too, because it's very difficult to transition artists and work with artists who are doing completely and utterly different styles, if you see, or different mark making, so that it looks like a completely different painter each time. For me, in my innocence of what I know about art, I feel you have that. You always bring the same elements to the table. Of course, they look completely differently on canvas.
Yeah, I'm not consciously applying a style. I'm just trying to respond. But it's great that you say that you see that there's a connection between things.
Yeah, for me, there definitely is. And that sort of brings me on to your last point here, which is color usage. Yeah. What do you mean about that?
Okay, so one of my favorite books on color is Derek Jarman's book, Chroma.
Okay.
Jarman wrote this when he was going blind. I mean, I don't know if you know, but Jarman had AIDS, and obviously one of the sort of last aspects of AIDS is that you go blind. And I think in terms of your color receptors, I think the last color receptors that you can perceive is blue. That's why his last film is blue. And so this was written, and it's just a series of descriptions about color, and I think is really eloquent. I learned color theory when I was an art student, and I spent 3 years of a degree really badly using color. I discovered, obviously, midway through my degree that I was colorblind, and I didn't know that I was colorblind, although I suspected along the way. But I didn't really understand color. I didn't really know what mixed with what to make what. Really, I was a good sort of 10 years into teaching color where I began to really understand color. So I've done a lot of research on color. I mean, I teach color theory. And basically, the more I started to invest time in really thinking about color and really enjoying that process of mixing color, then I think, I learned a great deal about color.
I suppose there's an argument that everybody sees everything differently, and we will never know what I see orange as, or you see orange as, for example. It's a completely personal thing, but it interests me how, as a colorblind person, as you call yourself, that you are unable to capture the colors that certainly that I see when I look at your paintings. That looks like a color scheme that would probably be in the environment that you're painting. So how does that manifest?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think color blindness is the wrong piece of language.
Okay.
I think it's more color confusion. Okay. And so it's really interesting that actually your perception of color isn't necessarily about what your color receptors do. When I look at a color, what I'm thinking about is its temperature and its tonality. I mean, green grass is a bit of a nightmare, and if I try to think about how to mix it, how do I mix it? So I've got to experiment. So for me, I think one of the key things is that idea of mixing on the palette, and then trying things out. Seeing is an incredibly complicated process anyway. So the fact that colour doesn't exist physically, exists only in the head, and we can't objectively measure what we perceive.
Well, you know, I think they're great points. And if just to finish, I just wanted to say that as a admirer of art and somebody who loves it, you know, and I think everybody who loves it, we are not paying you as an artist to make a photograph. We're paying you to interpret something, and that interpretation can come in incredible colors. I mean, I have some painters who do some bizarre colors that you just think this shouldn't work at all, but it works within the confines of its own painting. And I think that's what is so spectacular about what you guys do, and I'm totally in awe. But that's just as a fan anyway. But thanks so much, Phil, for everything. Really, really great advice. I'll put this all together, and I'm going to finish off now, guys and gals, with a whole ream of Phil's work, both the nudes and the landscapes, to give you a feel what he's like. So thanks for popping in, and cheers, Phil. Thanks a lot, mate.
I hope the weather's good down there, Mark.
Thanks, mate.
You're not too overrun with tourists. Bye.
Bye-bye.